Hold on. We're going to go right now to Peter Alexander. He's been inside the White House where he got a look at those emails on the Benghazi talking points. Peter, it's all yours.
Chris, yeah, good to visit with you right now. Here I have about 10 of those pages. There were a total of 100 documents of the Benghazi emails, all of which were initially provided several months ago to Congress, according to senior administration officials, the same ones that you have seen in pieces over the last several days. I only have about 10 of them here because the remaining 90 are now being faxed up to you so that we can try to examine them in further detail. But senior administration officials in conversations with us say very clearly, in an effort to put this controversy to rest, echoing what the president has said, that there is no there, that the CIA, the leaders at the CIA, very much agreed with the assessment of the State Department and the White House, that they were content that the final talking points were not scrubbed down in any way, that they believe that those did accurately demonstrate their assessment of what took place at that time on September 11th of 2012 at the Benghazi diplomatic facility, which was initially referred to as a consulate. That was one of the specific changes that was referred to as stylistic at the time. We have now copies of all 12 of the talking points and the email conversations that took place behind the scenes. There are emails from the CIA director at the time, David Petraeus, the deputy director, Mike Morrell. His emails were included in this as well as those emails written by some of the top national security staff members at the White House, as well as members of the State Department, too, Chris.
Well, wait a minute. Let's get back. You mean there's been some revision now in what we know to be the case that Ansar Sharia, the al-Qaeda group in North Africa, was somehow erased? Any reference to that after the initial talking point? Let's take that one. The initial version of the talking points to be used by Susan Rice referenced Ansar Sharia, which is the al-Qaeda group in North Africa. That was taken out, and the CIA think that says now that didn't influence our information on what had happened, the lack of a terrorist reference?
What they are saying is that the use of the word extremists, according to senior administration officials, was a reference to terrorism in some form, that they weren't certain at that time because it continued to have references to those spontaneous protests that had been taking place there. According to senior administration officials, their assertion is that they're not using al-Qaeda or a reference to Ansar al-Sharia, which is sort of commonly referred to as an affiliate of al-Qaeda, though some people would insist otherwise. Nonetheless, it is a terrorist organization. They say that at that time it was not, they couldn't be certain that that was the case. They didn't want to prejudice the investigation already being launched by the FBI at that time, and that's why that language wasn't used at the time.
They put it in the talking points because they believed Ansar Sharia was involved, and then they took it out because they put it in. This doesn't make any sense. It was put in by the intelligence people and then taken out by them. And the other thing is, how come all those half dozen terrorist attacks that were referenced in the initial talking points were also yanked out? Are they saying now that they were kept in some form because they referred to them as extremist groups or something? It looks to me like it was scrubbed. It still does.
The initial talking points, we are told by senior administration officials, were written by the director of the Office of Terrorism Analysis. When those initial talking points were reviewed by a variety of people, as they describe, this is a snapshot in time. They say this is a process that takes place frequently, although certainly not under circumstances like what took place in 9/11 of last year. That when it went through the process, among the intelligence leaders who looked at these emails, it was the deputy CIA director, Mike Morrell, who had concerns that were similar to the concerns, independent of the State Department, about the language that was being used in there. And ultimately, that's why the changes were made, and that the same person who created the initial talking points, that the intelligence analysts were comfortable with the final language of those talking points when they were provided to Susan Rice.
Who was in charge of the talking points?
It was initially the director of the, as I said, the director of the Office of Terrorism Analysis at the CIA who initially was in charge of them. And as they described it, it was an interagency process where multiple individuals communicated.
No, that doesn't make sense, though, because somebody has to be the final word and say, just like in a movie, who does the final cut? Somebody has to be the editor and said, this is what we're putting on the air. Who was the person who was the final editor? Was it the person who used the phrase building leadership? What the heck does that mean? Is that a reference to Secretary Clinton or to who else? Who else is it? A building leadership at the State Department? That's a phrase that just jumps out at anybody who's political.
I think ultimately it was, as we see in one of the emails, I don't have all 100 right in front of me right now, but we know that David Petraeus himself said that he was fine with these, I think is the exact language that's used there. So ultimately, he was one of the last to sign off on them before they were provided.
But who's the building leadership at State?
Who's the building leadership at state? That was Hillary Clinton, of course, at the time.
I think it seems odd to refer to a person